I'm Rachel Gable. I'm here today with Kelly Clark. He's an attorney at McDonough Law. Kelly has a number of areas of specialization, but one of those is public utilities representation, which is an area I am not as familiar with. Kelly, can you tell us a little bit about that area of law practice?
Sure. I was general counsel for about $120 million public utility. It was water and wastewater. And I've also done some electric utility as well. But public utilities, it's a kind of a different animal. You have to deal with all of your regulatory agencies, EPA, FREC, all the various state and federal regulatory agencies. And sometimes stemming out of like with the EPA, they're requiring, or they might get you into a consent decree or even file a lawsuit against the utilities. So they have to either scrub their effluent, or they have to do something with the smokestacks or water. There might be a water issue. Normally with water and wastewater, you're dealing with the Clean Water Act or the Safe Drinking Water Act. So, and all of those can get very expensive anytime that the EPA gets involved, or some of these other agencies get involved. It can be very expensive. And that, of course, trickles down to the consumer, to the guys paying, the people out there paying the bills, the customers. So it's always a tight balancing act, keeping those rates as low as you can, and dealing with the regulatory agencies. So that's kind of the general term, how it works.
I know a lot of people across agriculture, especially, probably not especially here in Colorado, but a lot of folks here in Colorado are familiar with dealing with the EPA and dealing with the waters of the U.S. and the Clean Water Act and those sorts of things. If someone finds himself up against the EPA potentially, I'm sure a good contract is maybe the first place to start.
Well, it's with the EPA, it depends. I mean, there's different. They look at things in different ways depending on where they are, what their approach is. You have different. The U.S. is broken up into different areas, and certain different areas of the country. They call them regions. EPA Region 9, Region 10, and those regions have different priorities. A lot of times it's I don't know that there's that much that many drinking water issues that I know of in Colorado, but certainly the wastewater, the Clean Water Act side of it is a very, very big deal. And dealing with the EPA is not easy. They're many times unreasonable. They have to be convinced, and you're not just convincing one person. You might be convincing 10 people up the line. So it's and it they can be dealt with, and they are. Think of them as I always think of them as a sort of like an octopus in a way. They get it once they get a hold of you, it's hard to get loose. And so it's that having somebody that has experience dealing with the EPA is certainly an important aspect of where you're headed if you have to deal with them. And then my dealing with the EPA is not just on, like I said, not just on the one end, but on the other end of it is creating the improvements that they require. So dealing with the engineers, and then the procurement and the construction and finish up of and putting online of all those facilities that the EPA requires. then you have to go out and get the money to build those utilities and to fix that infrastructure that the EPA either demands or the court demands after you go to trial. And so that's another aspect of it is marketing those bonds and creating a market or going to a market in a way that you get it the most bang for your buck. So if you're going to go borrow $30 million, you want to make sure that you get the best rate, the interest rate that you can on your bonds. So that's always a big part of it too, is not just going and getting the money, but making sure that you get the money as cheap as you can. So. Sure.
And that all speaks to how utility companies work to keep their rates low, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's all. And that's if you think about, borrowing, say, $50 million for a utility because you just can't afford it. Nobody can go out and afford to buy $50 million worth of infrastructure. Say, some smaller community in Colorado, they're going to have to go out and borrow the money and pay it out over 20 or 30 years. So that's a big part of it. So it's getting the bond council put together and picking the right entity to market those bonds for you in the marketplace, in the municipal bond marketplace. All very, very important.
You sound like you might have ice water in your veins, being able to take on the EPA and also get bonds in order and all of the things that you have to juggle in this type of practice.
Hardly have ice water, but you have to act like you have ice water anyway.
Fake it until you make it, huh?
Yeah. Let them think you do.
Very good. There was a big case in northeastern Colorado that a lot of agriculture folks heard about with a feed yard that had, they have to have certain containment ponds for runoff. Right. And there was like 100-year rainfall, and one of the containment ponds ran over and did something to some endangered species habitat. And it was a mess. Like, the containment ponds were built to the EPA's specifications, but they were still in trouble with the EPA because they ran over. So it was quite a project. So
I can imagine. Yeah. It's not always just a utility. It can be, just like you said, a feedlot, or it can be somebody that has I ran into one not too long ago. It was just a smaller development that had an issue with runoff like that. So that was a problem that, and the EPA had come to them and said they had to do something about it. So yeah, it's not just the big utilities. They come after everybody, little and big.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's a good a good time to have someone good in your corner, and that would be you and McDonough Law.